Hey folks, Steven here solo for a hastily made, loosey-goosey, nice addition to news. MTarget is not here because he lives in New England, and New England, I'm not sure if it really exists anymore, given that it was hit by a massive, massive storm. So good luck to everybody out there. Hopefully, your cars didn't get a tree deposited on top of them. But for everybody who is here, very few of you, we're going to be talking real quick about the update coming to Dota 2 on Wednesday, being the Dueling Fates update, or the 7.07 patch. So every year following the International, there is a relatively big or a really big balance update patch, and it's been a long time coming for this one. Not sure what kind of delays Valve might have had along the way. Not really sure what other kind of issues may have happened, but we're a couple months separated from the International at this point, and we are just getting our big update to Dota 2, and it is a pretty damn big update in Valve's defense, because again, not really sure what took so long, but there's a lot of work that seems to be put into this one. So the biggest thing, and I will share screens real quickly for anybody who can, for anybody who is watching on YouTube. Share screen. All right, so the centerpiece, more or less, to the update are the two characters, the two new heroes, Pangolier, who is apparently a Pangolan musketeer, and Black Willow, who may or may not be Sylph. I didn't play much Dota 1. Those are the two new characters, and there's some interest of both heroes. So what seems to be Pangolier's Q has kind of it's kind of like a two-part spell, which is fairly unique. So he dashes from one point to another, and then after dashing is able to send out an AoE spell in what seems to be any direction. So that's it seems to be two keystrokes for one spell, which is fairly Shield Crash. I wrote up a piece for Ingven Global kind of describing this, and the way I described it was it's kind of like Earthshaker's Ultimate, except instead of doing more damage based on the number of targets in the AoE, it does a greater damage reduction. So it's not going to be, it doesn't necessarily seem like it's going to be a high damage spell, but obviously serves quite a bit of purpose. And there's another purpose which we'll get to later. So his third ability is a passive called Heart Piercer. As I understand it, it basically allows him to ignore armor randomly as he attacks enemy heroes, so he can occasionally get just basically a crit. And finally, his ulti is Rolling Thunder, which rolls around, you get to control movement, and you bash and damage any enemies that you happen to run into while rolling. On top of that, you can use the Shield Crash spell while rolling, which I believe gives you free movement to hop up cliffs and hop around other things. And the other hero is Black Willow, and she's pretty unique. And the biggest thing, as you'll probably notice right here by looking at this, is that she actually has 5 different spells. Now, you can't use all the spells at the same time, because Terrorize and Bedlam work together. They both, in lore, use the same character that lives in her lantern or something. But either way, that's not that important. You can't use them at the same time. But her actual spells are Bramble Maze, which is interesting because we don't really get to see many characters that create impassable terrain things. There are heroes that do this in League of Legends. There are heroes that do this in other MOBA style games, but we don't have many of them in Dota 2. You know, you kind of get that with Earthshaker, and you kind of sort of get something like it with Arc Warden with his with his protective bubbles, but that's about it. With this, you create impassable bushes within an AoE, and if you walk into them, if an enemy walks into them, I should say, it will create a root effect with damage. So that's going to be very interesting in terms of how it's applied. I'm curious as to how it levels up. Lot to talk about there, and lots of potential uses. Her next ability is Shadow Realm, not to be confused with the Shadow Realm from Yu-Gi-Oh! Instead, she basically has the untargetable Slark has for his ultimate with bonus magic damage added to that. Cursed Crown is similar to Disruptor's Q, I guess, but also kind of similar to Oracle Stun. It marks an enemy, and after 4 ticks, will let out an AoE stun, like over the target unit. So that's a pretty interesting spell, but that's the most normal of her spells, I would say. So Bedlam is I believe it is one of her ultimates, judging by the like an allied kind of unit thing circling around Willow, which in this case, you know, as you can see, shoots enemies as it passes through them. And cannot be used while Terrorize is active, but Terrorize is basically a targeted AoE version of Druid spell, which forces enemy units to flee towards their spawn. So it's a very unique set of spells with the extra function of having 5 different spells on one hero. So it's going to be interesting to see how she pans out, what kind of stuff is going to, you know, how those spells are going to fit together, and how, you know, OP she ends up being, at least in the short term. Same with Pangolier. Generally speaking, these characters tend to either be really underpowered or overpowered when they first drop. So it's going to be interesting to see how that ends up panning out here. So the other big changes in terms of gameplay type stuff, because I can get to the rest later, we had a massive balance patch. I believe every single hero was affected in some way, primarily through skill tree changes, where you know, at least a few different tweaks were made to their skill tree. But on top of that, we had a number of reworks. So the biggest ones, as you'll see, are Beastmaster. The way it works with Beastmaster now is okay, so first, his wild axes have been changed to kind of function like a sort of sticky napalm, a Batrider sticky napalm kind of move, where you have a stacking damage buff on concurrent uses of the spell, where you hit them once with wild axes and it'll do X damage a short time later, and it will do even more damage, and then more damage, and then more damage, etc. So on top of that, they really, I would say honestly that they nerfed Call of the Wild. Before, it had a function where the boar and the hawk were both leveled up, not to say separately because you level them up at the same time, but they were 2 separate spells that gained different boosts based on what level the spell itself was. Now, you get up to 3 units summoned with Call of the Wild. So, at level 1 and 2, you summon a boar, which, as you know, will slow enemies when they're hit. And once you hit level 3, you gain the hawk back. Now, they've removed the invisibility passive for the Hawk. And instead, for level 4, you now gain the Boar and a random neutral. And the random neutral can be one of the different quote-unquote big creeps from the medium or larger camps. It's going to be very interesting to see whether that actually pans out to be a nerf or a buff. The additional kind of free vision that a Hawk gives is very, very important for Beastmaster's use at high levels. So it's going to be interesting to see if he ends up becoming more of a, if he ends up, being a lot weaker in fights because of these changes. Broodmother, I would say, got really heavily nerfed. Spin Web no longer grants invisibility. That is huge. She still gets this different, she still has the speed boost and ability to move over ledges with Web, but lack of invisibility is huge there. To compensate for that, they tweaked how spiderweb charges end up working. You get more charges now, which allows you to just more effectively switch from one lane to another. After a certain point, you'll be able to just slap down all 8 of your webs on the map at once, which allows you to quickly change from side lane to side lane. But the fact that they took away the invisibility, that feels huge. And they also kind of retooled how Spiderite health works. And Spiderling health works. They got more of a boost. They got a boost to armor and a boost to magic resistance, but they lost pure HP. So that might end up working out okay for them. But just in general, it feels like they are there as like a kind of go-to pick. Gonna hurt Team Liquid quite a bit, at least in that regard. So lots of other tweaks to a bunch of different heroes. Got pretty heavily tweaked. For the most part, he stays the same. They split up Adaptive Strike into 2 different skills. And it in terms of the stun and knockback and how it relates to your morphed statistics. But the bigger note is that they completely changed his ultimate. Before, it was Replicate, which allows you to create a copy of an enemy or allied hero. Now they changed it to Morph, which allows you to basically turn yourself into a copy of an enemy hero. So that's really interesting. It seems like he's still in place as a kind of potential, high escape. If these hold up, change ulti that way. Next big hero that got changed is Tiny. You can, go over the spells. They got rid of his Scepter Cleave ability, and they removed Craggy Exterior, and they replaced those 2 things with Tree Grab, which, I quote, targets a tree to use in attacks for 2, 3, 4, or 5 hits, extends attack range. Each hit deals 25% more damage and 75% more base damage to buildings. Splashes 70% of damage along the attack path, affects buildings. Cooldown starts after bonus attacks are used. So they still have that additional functionality for him having a passive cleave type thing. They removed it from Scepter, and the lack of Craggy Exterior is very, very interesting. And obviously, this is going to change how you build the hero in a big way, because few heroes really rely on a Scepter the way that Tiny does. He still has uses without the Scepter, but that cleave was such an important part of who he was as a hero. So it's going to be interesting to see how he ends up holding up. More of a buffer and nerf for him And if it is a buff, is it enough of a buff for him to get high-level play again? So Viper, another hero that was very heavily changed, and it's a hero that people were very happy to see get changed in a way that probably makes him worse. So Corrosive Skin no longer has a slow, but does have increased damage. And no death sentence if Viper ends up getting a little bit of early farm. Poison attack now different, as you can see. They rescaled how it does damage. They rescaled how it slows, and they changed the mana costs. Nether Toxin is now an AoE spell that does damage over time, and while also, interestingly, applying break. So it's going to be a lot more break options in the game now, outside of Viper. Before, you had very limited options in terms of applying that spell, but for knocking out heroes like Bristleback primarily, but also, a handful of others like Phantom Assassin, like Abaddon, having new ways of break is very important for disabling those really high impact passive abilities. So a very interesting niche pick just based on how they implement Nether Toxin. It feels like it's going to be a much less potent, low level pub stomp type character. So that should be fun. I'm quite excited both for the tweaks to Viper and also the increased characters like Bristleback. Wraith King, hero reworked. So much lower strength gain, 3.2 to 2.8. Mortal Strike is now very, very different. So it still has the crit functionality, but now it has a function where you gain charges based on killing creeps minions. I believe, not sure, that they are the same skeleton minions spawned by Warlords, the neutrals. Not entirely sure, but that makes him a very interesting, unique kind of push character. And it's gonna be quite interesting to see how that pans out, because Wraith King has always inhabited a very unique niche in that he was the ultimate pure ignore everything stun right click character. And tweaking him in this way, man, I'm really interested to see how he ends up panning out as a character, because that's quite different. So in terms of other major notes, there was a big nerf to Necrophos. I get over there. Ghost Shroud has been nerfed across the board. The slow has been heavily reduced. He takes more he gets more of a bonus damage whenever he's hit by spells while in Ghost Shroud form. Heartstop Roar got buffed a little bit, but for the most part, and Reaper Scythe, as you can see, cooldown was increased. Mana cost in the first two levels were both increased by 50 and 10, which isn't much, but it's still quite a bit. But the big thing is the nerfs to Ghost Shroud and Scythe are going to be, help deal with that character that has really, really taken on a new role in the meta. Change I really like is Mirana's. They tweaked how Leap works. It now has multiple charges, which should make it a more effective solo offlane type of hero. But they reduced how Leap can help you deal with, help you kind of serve a support role by buffing your allies. Now you get those same buffs to movement speed and attack speed, but it only applies to Mirana. No longer applies to teammates. So those are the primary tweaks to heroes. As you can see, there are plenty more. There's plenty more there to talk about, but we're just going to get right over to items. So with items, once again, pretty much everything was changed, but the biggest thing, in my opinion, was the early game support items. So Courier is now 200 gold, but you no longer have to upgrade it to a Flying Courier. It does it its damn self, which is quite helpful in pub games, just because I'm sure we've all been in the situation where it's just pulling teeth to have, a witch doctor actually play support. On top of that, Flying Couriers no longer get a speed boost, but do have a new shield ability in terms of having a defensive option to help with, anybody that tries to gank your courier. Still going to be very killable in pub games. Not going to be quite as killable in pro games, though. But on top of that, they actually removed bottle crowing. You can no longer have your courier bring your bottle back to the spawn in order to recharge it. If you want to recharge your bottle, you're going to have to go to fountain your damn self, or you're going to have to pick up a rune. So that's going to really impact a lot of heroes like Dragon Knight, a lot of mid heroes with low mana pools, but high pushing abilities. It's going to force them into roaming around to get runes a lot more. It's also going to really add more value, river runes on top of that. So wards are more expensive now. They are 80 gold instead of 60, and they give a bigger amount of experience for anybody that dewards. Tango's up in cost, but more charges. And all the early game stat items, Gauntlet, Slippers, Mantle, Wraithband, Bracer, Null Talisman, all those are now cheaper. And they tweaked a lot of those items that build off of them to no longer give boosted damage, but to give extra boosts to the statistics of the primary stat for those items that come from them. So on top of that, as you can see, Ether Lens was reworked. They got rid of the spell amp, but they buffed how much mana you get from it. And is also how much mana regen you get from it. It changed the recipe for Battle Fury, which now requires a Demon Edge instead of a Claymore and Broadsword. So that's going to make it a lot more difficult to farm early. It's going to be very interesting to see how that ends up translating into pub games, but not necessarily that much more interesting for pro games, because you don't have to worry as much about pro carries getting up to 2,400 gold. New recipe for Bloodstone requires a Perseverance instead of Soul Ring and Recipe. I think that's how it was back in the day. You would need a point booster and a Perseverance. And also a buff to the number of initial charges. And they got rid of the AoE heal. Diffusal Blade, big update, because that item has been very, very, very popular to the point where it's been basically a go-to item for any hero. It used to be kind of a niche pick for different agility heroes. Now it's just a go-to for any carry. So it no longer dispels, no longer has charge limits, no longer upgradable, increased cooldown. That's going to make it, that's probably going to return it back to where it was before. And not having a charge limit, that's a big deal. But the fact that it's no longer upgradable limits its use as a late game item, because it used to give you just really, really good stats. And the fact that it no longer dispels, it's basically a targeted slow. It's also going to limit its use to heroes that, I could see Phantom Assassins, Rickies, those kinds of heroes using it, but that's about it. Iron Talon is gone. So is Poor Man's Shield. Both of those items are no longer in existence. First time ever it's happened, I believe. Recipe changed for Magic Wand. Necro reworked. They changed they changed both its recipe as well as some of the different abilities of the minions it spawned. And I'm going to scroll down because I want to talk about the 5 new items, excuse me. Very interesting stuff. So, the first new item is Meteor Hammer. As you can see, builds off of various early game items as well as an Ogre Axe. Gives you pretty good stats across the board. But active ability, channeling, 3 seconds. Summons a meteor that strikes a 300 AoE and stuns for 1.75 seconds. Applies a 6-second debuff that deals 60 damage per second to structures. Cast range, mana cost, granted vision, and it destroys trees. It's going to be very, very, very interesting to see how that pans out. It's set in, my initial take when I read this was that it's going to be absurdly overpowered. Just having a fairly cheap stun is a really big deal. Add to that how it allows you to attack towers. I mean, I could very easily see that being a kind of it kind of sounds like it functions like sniper shrapnel from a few patches ago in terms of really just barreling through towers quickly. So that if any of these items are going to end up being, I'm thinking it's going to be that one. So with it kind of serves the same purpose that Ether Lens used to. Now they reduced the spell amplification and made it more of a statistical item. It gives you boost to mana regen and mana pool, but gets rid of the increased cast range. This one kind of fills that void. Obviously, it's a vit booster and an energy booster plus a recipe. Relatively expensive, but brings back amplified spells as well. Or excuse me, am I talking about the wrong item? Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, Kaya is the new item that I was thinking of. That's the one that serves the spell amplification bonus or purpose that Aetherlens used to. And it also now gives you a bit of protection from spells like Mana Break, etc., etc. Multiple instances don't stack, so don't Dragon Lance on this. Aeon Disc, the one I was talking about before. So whenever you take damage and are below 80% health, you apply a strong dispel on your hero, and you gain a 2.5 second buff that reduces all incoming and outgoing damage to 0. So kinda, sorta like Abaddon's ultimate. Obviously, you don't heal, but it allows you to escape and will give you a lot of extra tank. I imagine that I'm very curious as to what kind of function it's going to serve with a character like Huskar, where you kind of want to be at a low health for a prolonged period of time. Whether there will be an ability, whether that passive might get turned into kind of an active, where you can drag it out of your backpack into your, so you time that passive ability. I'm going to be interested to see how that goes. Spirit Vessel, it's an upgrade to Urn of Shadows, which is kind of, I think, really long overdue. Urn of Shadows has been a very useful item for kind of support characters. It's filled an interesting niche for heroes like Nyx Assassin, like various gank heroes that, Bounty Hunter, to a lesser degree Ricky even. But a bunch of different tools. It lowers the amount of HP regen and health regen from when it's used on enemies, amplifies any health regen and healing when it's used on allies. And finally, the Nullifier. The target will be slowed by 100% for 0.4 seconds. And not much to talk about with that. Upgrade of Sacred Relic, so it's going to give you big damage. that's all I'm going to talk about for items for now, but you should really check out the patch notes because there's so much to talk about. Lots of, in terms of other outside individual items and heroes changes, lots of tweaks to drafting. They made a snaking format rather than a rotating or an alternating format. As you can see, before it was A, B, A, B, A, B, etc. Now it's A, B, B, A, A, B, B, A, A, B. That's going to be interesting for all pick because that makes it a less completely counter pick kind of drafting system. And they got rid of randoming, kind of, which is very nice. So instead of randoming from everyone and getting 200 bonus gold, everybody gets a pool of 10 heroes per day that will give them a free mango upon selection. And if you random, it gives you one of those 10 heroes, but also gives you an additional Ironwood branch, which will reduce the number of last pick randoms you get in your pub game. They also changed captain's mode a bit. Let me scroll down to get their exact words. Captain's mode now has an extra ban in the first phase. It's going to be very interesting to see how that ends up translating for pro games because we see more bans are going to open up more options and hopefully result in less, kind of like old school Bat Rider, old school Darkseer, 100% pick ban rates. Hopefully get rid of those kinds of heroes. Things keeps lineups fresh, as the season progresses, as this patch really gets dug into by pro players. On top of that, they tweaked creep spawning in lanes. They tweaked the map a bit. They did a whole bunch of mathematical recalculations for stuff like armor, health reduction, etc., and plenty more. Whew. And I think that's everything I wanted to talk about. So, switch back so you can see my gorgeous face. So, here I am. Now, once again, there's a lot here to talk about. And I'd be here all day if I was going to go over every single little granular thing about this update. So there's going to be a link to check out this patch notes. And that's about it for today. I'll hopefully be back in the next day or two, talk with MTarget about ESL 1 and preview Dota Pit, which happens in Croatia this weekend. Well, the actual tournament itself, I believe, starts on Thursday, but the finals will be on Sunday. So, everybody have a great week. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know what you'd like to see from us if you aren't particularly interested in hearing me ramble about different patch notes or tournaments. So, everybody have a great week and come in next time.